Hey guys, John here, and we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to do a discussion and analysis of the band The Misfits. And I'm not going to be doing it as some fanboy of The Misfits. I'm going to try to come at it as like a rock and roll historian. And I'm no rock and roll historian, but I'm a big fan of rock and roll. So as like a novice rock and roll fan, but I love rock and roll from the blues and country that influenced it to the early rockabilly, the doo-wop, the garage rock mod, into the 70s stuff, the heavy stuff, heavy metal, punk rock, new wave, everything in between. I like real rock and roll. So we're going to be coming at it from that angle and trying to figure out the Misfits' place in real rock and roll. And the first time I heard the Misfits was 1986. I heard a couple songs off of college radio, one of the punk shows, and my friend had just bought an Walk Among Us LP. So it was pretty wild at the time. But within a month or 2 months after that, Metallica's Master of Puppets came out, and Cliff Burton, the bass player, was wearing a Misfits t-shirt, the Crimson Ghost on the cover, and that's what gave us basically the green light. Everyone got into the Misfits. So we listened to the Misfits throughout the rest of the 80s. By the early 90s, I was no longer listening to the Misfits. They're kind of in the back. I still liked them, but I got into other musics. And I didn't really pay attention when all the kids were buying the Misfit shirts in the malls, and you'd see the shirts at every show. And the whole reformation of the Misfits with a new singer, different songs. I didn't pay attention to any of that. I did go to a show, one of that era Misfit show. I think it was a package show with like the Damned and the Dickies, maybe DI. But I went for the other bands, and when they came on, I wasn't having it, and I left early. And not to knock them, but it just wasn't something I was into at that point. So I definitely wasn't a fanboy. But as I get older and listen to the Misfits more and more, I realize how great they really are. And I think they may even be greater than we give them credit for. I had to edit this in. I completely forgot about this. This was my hot take. But I'm sure other people thought of this. But I just wanted to state that I believe the Misfits are the greatest American rock and roll band. And I don't think people are going to see that until a few years now in the future. But I try to think of who's the greatest American rock and roll band. And I think the Beach Boys are getting lost to history, and their achievements are getting forgotten about by the newer generations. And I think bands like the Misfits and the Ramones and even the Stooges, they're getting easier on the ears as we go through time. And bands like when I was a kid and I was into the Sex Pistols, and I couldn't even say that name to my friends without getting like laughed at, or I wouldn't say that to adults or teach. You couldn't say the name. And now in 2022, they have like the Disney Channel has a special on them. Bands like Joy Division are revered, and people love them. When they were just, these were like underground bands that were scoffed at. So I see the trend, but I think the Misfits, to younger generations, their music doesn't sound harsh and noisy like it did to our generations. And with the songwriting and everything, I really think the Misfits have the most songs, and that's the Misfits songbook. If you just had the music, the chords and the melody, it's up there with some of the great American songwriters, the Hank Williams, the Gershwins. I think there's absolute pure music in there, and they have enough songs that would put them, I think, as the greatest American rock and roll band. But that's for debate. But I believe in a decade or two, I'll be proven right, but we will see. And who else is it going to be? Is it going to be, David Lee Roth, Ara Van Halen? Is that going to be the greatest rock and roll band? Aerosmith? They're too muddy, uneven of a career. The Stooges, they just weren't there for the live shows. They couldn't back up what they had on the albums. And I'm not sure. But I do think the Misfits are going to come out last man standing as the greatest American rock and roll band. And now I'm going to edit this back into the video. Cheers. Anyway, we're gonna analyze this band. This band, the four guys from New Jersey in the late 70s, coming up with this sort of music. But we're gonna analyze Last Caress, their most famous song, and the one that Metallica covered. Probably the first Misfits song a good portion of America heard was through the Metallica. But we're gonna analyze that song. It's a 2-minute song, so if you're not familiar with it, you should go check it out. But before you check it out, I just want to say the lyrics are very offensive, very shocking to some people. So be warned, but we're going to be analyzing this. So you could go look up Last Caress, the Misfits, and we want the studio version. It's 2 minutes long, and then you could come back. Okay, so hopefully everyone knows the song or heard the song, but we're going to start out with the opening lines of this song, and we're going to hear them, and they're just absolutely shocking and offensive, but not in a sarcastic way or like a wise guy way. It's just a bold statement in the tradition of like bold statements of rock and roll and the blues, and I think it is one of the most shocking opening liners, but also one of the strongest opening lines, opening couplets of all rock and roll songs, into like in the tradition of I stand up next to a mountain, chop it down with the side of my hand, or please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste, been around for a long, long year, stole many a man's soul and faith. Like these bold statements that go back to the blues. Muddy Waters had lines like this. Bo Diddley, when I was just a young boy at the age of 5, something in my pocket kept a lot of folks alive. These bold bravado statements, fantastic. I think they call me the hunter. That's my name. Pretty girls like you, that's my only game. And this statement, another great one. I am an antichrist. I am an anarchist. Brilliant line. But I still think the Misfits one ups the ante from that. And it's just absolutely shocking. And if people hear it right away, half the people are out of the game just with the opening lines. But we're going to hear that right now.
I got something to say, and I'll kill her baby today, and it doesn't matter much to me as long as it's said.
Okay, so those were the shocking lines, and you're going to notice he sings with absolute confidence, and he sings it with bravado, but he states it as matter of fact. There's no hint of a joke or anything in there. And then the next lines after it, I got something to say. I killed a baby today. Doesn't matter much to me as long as it's dead. And the lines after that even up the ante and make it more disgusting, offensive as it could be. And I don't even know if Glenn Danzig, the singer, songwriter, if he even came out to say, I'm going to make the most offensive opening lines, or it was just a joke, or he didn't put that much thought into it. I don't know, but here we are. Those are the lines. And now we're going to listen to the chorus, which I think is one of the most beautiful choruses ever written, and it's in the tradition of the great ballads from the 1950s, early 60s, or with some of the most beautiful doo-wop songs, or the great works of Phil Spector and that whole girl group era. You have an absolutely beautiful chorus juxtaposed this hideous opening verse. So here's the chorus.
Sweet lovely day, I am waiting for your bell. Must we take one last go?
Okay, so that was the chorus, and I think lyrically it is absolutely beautiful. It's 3 lines, and it's sweet lovely death. I'm waiting for your breath. Come sweet death, one last caress. And if you listen to the beauty of those lines, is he's personifying death. Sweet lovely death. What a great line. What a great vision. Like in your head you have sweet lovely death, and you're waiting for your breath, and then come sweet death, one last caress. It's absolute poetry. And to put it next to what we just heard in those opening lines about the mother and the baby is just crazy. It's crazy, but it makes tension. And I think of the last line, come sweet death, one last caress. And he came up with that line, and I think of the word caress. I've never used that word in my entire life, in a conversation, in a thought, ever. It's just not a word that a working class, a 20-year-old guy from New Jersey, or these guys from New Jersey would have used in conversation. To come up with that beautiful line and those beautiful 3 lines is pretty amazing. And we're going to listen to it again, but we're not going to pay attention to the lyrics. We're going to pay attention to how they turn on the reverb, the echo on it, and make it sound more beautiful under this noise of a rhythm section. And we're also going to listen to the background vocals, whether they were written their parts or it was improvised. but the way the background vocals come in, kind of accenting what he's singing, and the reverb echo, it turns into just a poem, really, in music. But we're gonna listen to it again. And there you go. And I think that little chorus is as beautiful as anything Phil Spector's Giant Productions did, and it's about as beautiful as a chorus in rock and roll as you could get. And I think of Phil Spector, the beautiful songs that Phil Spector did. The guy was a mastermind producer with all modern technology around him, with unlimited budget, top session musicians. He could pull in orchestras, he could pull in woodwinds, whatever he needed, with top singers, Ronnie Spector, all the singers he worked with tops. He had professional songwriters, and he pulled off this beautiful music. You have four guys, couple of Italians from New Jersey, like in their 20s, wrote this song in their basement or in their garage, went to a local studio on a shoestring budget, and came up with something as beautiful as the best music of the 20th century. It's pretty amazing. And let's talk about the music. So the music underneath is just sloppy, desperate, chords bashing away, underlying, laying a groundwork for this beautiful tune. And if you listen to it now, the bass player and the guitar player are out of tune, yet the vocals are completely in tune, confident, and they never waver. He's pitch perfect, Glenn Danzig, yet the band is almost in shambles, but it's right on the edge, and they're pushing, and it's good. And you'll notice the bass player, when they come to a stop, instead of everyone stopping at once, the guitar will stop, and then the bass will stop slightly after. They're just a little off, which adds to the realness and the vitality of the music. But what we're going to listen to is the chord changes of this song in the break. And they're just playing power chords, which is the root note of a chord and then the fifth. And they'll double it up with another root, an octave higher. So it's root, fifth, root. And that's just a power chord. It doesn't have a third in there. It has no other notes to define the chord. But if you listen to the chord changes, the way they set up these chords, you're going to hear minor chords and major chords. You're going to hear them without actually hearing the notes, just by the way they place the chords. And it's pretty cool. You'll hear it when they sing under the chorus. You'll hear the minor chords, yet they never actually play a minor chord. It's just dumb dinosaur bar chords. But we'll listen to this break and see if you could try to hear the minor chords in there and what would be major or minor. But just listen to them, how ramshackle they are, but how honest it is and real this music is. And here we go. We have that there. And now we're going to go to what I call is their dramatic pause, which really ties the knot onto this song. And a lot of bands stop and go to the chorus, so there'll be breaks where they stop. But this is done within the lyrical context of the song. They come to the stop part and build the tension, a dramatic pause, and then come into the last chorus. And it's perfection. And I don't know how much they thought of this. It just came naturally to them. But either way, it's there in this song. And here we got the dramatic pause. Now we're going to listen to the outro, my favorite part of this song. And this is a guy, Glenn Danzig, who was born in 1955, Italian from the suburb. They lived from Lodi, New Jersey, but that's really the suburbs of New York City. It's driving distance. You're in the suburbs. It's where all the working class ethnic people lived all around New York City. And he didn't grow up with punk rock. He was born in 55, so his musical background and influences were already well established before he even heard a Ramones record, let alone a Damned, or if he even heard any of that UK stuff. before this band even started. But what you're going to hear is someone who could only have been steeped in doo-wop and girl groups and old rock and roll, the way he improvises his singing on the outro. And it's a guy who never took any singing lessons, is a master of a voice, master of conveying emotion and hitting these notes. The way he improvises at the end is in the total tradition of the old doo-wop songs and the old ballads of the 1950s. And it's not cheesy, and I don't think he was saying, oh, I'm going to go for that old 1950s vocal outro. I just think it came naturally because it was in his blood. And if you hear the bands that do like, oh, their 1950s ballad, everything comes off sound like Happy Days or something cheesy. And this is as authentic as any music I've ever heard, and as authentic of a performance I've ever heard. I'm not saying it's the most authentic, but it's as authentic as anything else out there. And listen to it. It's an absolute thing of beauty. And this will bring me into, I'll do my last hot take after. But this ties in, and it makes me think that the Misfits are almost closer to a doo-wop group or a 1950s, early 60s rock and roll band than they are to a punk rock band. Yeah, they're loud, fast, and sloppy, but musically and identity-wise, Glenn Danzig and Jerry Only, these Italians from New Jersey, outside of New York, were much closer culturally to the guys who were doing the doo-wop than they are to the Sex Pistols or, the Dead Kennedys or whatever. These guys grew up with comic books, horror movies, and just like AM radio, and all the history of rock was in their blood. And just culturally, the working class, they're much closer to doo-wop. Growing up in the early 60s was no different than the guys 20 years before, what they grew up in their lives in these working class households. And which also goes to another thing, which I always find interesting, is how many Italians, working class Italians in the Northeast, in the tri-state area, let's say, or the Northeast, were into music. If you look at the bands, there was always, not always, maybe it's anecdotal, but I see it all the time. It's like the Italians that got into music, and in the working class Italian families, for some reason, it was okay for the working class, for sons to get into music. Whereas in other households, like Protestant households, it was shunned upon. And if you were German or Irish, you didn't get approval from your parents to go into it. But working class Italians, like, they're always pushing, get a trade, get a civil servant job, work, get a job, cut your hair, get a job. But if you were a musician, your old grandmother or the old grandfather or the cranky uncle, they say, oh, he's a musician. It was almost like it was a pride for Italians. And maybe it goes back to the Renaissance days, or maybe it's just that they didn't have much, these immigrants, but they carried, like, culturally the great singers of Italy. And of course, the opera was like a pride, like a badge of honor for Italians, like food. We had sculpture, we have art, but yet we have nothing in our house. But maybe that was the exception. Maybe I'm just making this whole thing up. But that's how I feel about the Italian working class. It was okay to be kind of like a bum, like to get into music, at least for a short period. You had more leeway than other households. But I don't know if I want to stand on this argument. It's just anecdotally, but who knows? Maybe I'm completely wrong and I just see things through my personal anecdotes. But anyway, let's listen to that last chorus and see how close they are to 1950s rock and roll and just the spirit of American music than they are to punk rock. Listen to this outro.
One last caress, one last caress again, one last caress again.
Okay, that was the outro. I think it was absolutely beautiful. And to tie this whole thing, this whole little journey we went through into 2 minutes, exactly 2 minutes, is perfection. And the last hot take I'm going to make is, and I'm not willing to stand on, I'm not going to die on this hill. I'm not even going to make this stand. I'm just throwing it out there for debate. And it's like, are the Misfits even a punk rock band, or are they just a rock and roll band? And there's a few reasons. Obviously, they're loud, fast, and sloppy. So they're punk rockers. They were in the punk scene. They played with the punk bands. They toured with the punk bands. But if you just take them by themselves and look at them, you got a bunch of guys who were like weightlifters, dressed like ghouls, in costume, and singing about Martians, zombies, just crazy unpunk rock stuff. They're almost more in line with Gwar or Kiss or Alice Cooper. And they certainly didn't have that, where the punk rock was a rebellion against like the big rock bands, the arena rock, the snobbishness of prog rock, and the elitism of rock stars, and this and that. And punk rock broke it down. So the crowd, it's just, we're doing this, that we could do what they're doing, or the crowd and the musicians were one and the same, kind of like it was in the 1950s when Elvis broke. He was just a dirt poor Southern guy, and everyone could do it. Everyone picked up guitars and did it. You see Buddy Holly, he was just a kid down the street. These weren't these huge movie stars, these glamorous, rich stars. It was just it was for the kids. And I don't think the Misfits really go by that, because the Misfits brought it back, that they're not only are they special and different than the crowd, they're almost not even humans. And it just seems, it doesn't feel like punk rock to me. And their songs, how they sung, their presence, the idea of them, it's almost its own thing. And just the way they carried so much of the traditional American music in there, if you listen to it, it's almost not punk rock. But I'm not willing to take the stand. I'm just throwing it out there. Are they really a punk rock band, or they just happen to be the time and the place, and a band like them weren't going to get slots opening for, Foreigner or whatever band, REO Speedwagon. They're going to end up at the dive bars with the punk kids. And of course, they were a couple years too early, so no one's going to be ready for them except for the Misfits, weirdos, rock and roll rebels anyway. But I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not willing to take a stand on that. I just think about it often. But anyway, I don't know. I guess leave your thoughts in the bottom. And maybe this was interesting. Maybe this was a complete bore. But I do think the Misfits, really underrated band. And there's a lot more there than just the high energy punk songs about monsters. But hope you enjoyed it. Cheers.